We are in the middle of a study of eschatology, focusing on Israel. We're at the beginning of the bigger study of eschatology, but kind of in the middle of studying the role that Israel plays in eschatology. If you're wondering what eschatology is, that is a long word that basically means the study of last things, from the Greek word eschaton, which means last things. What does the Bible say about the end of the world? What does the Bible say about the end of history? What has God planned for the end? And what I've been saying to you is that it matters greatly to God how redemptive history ends, because the whole purpose of it is bound up in how it ends. The reason there is a created universe, the reason there is humanity, the reason there is a purpose unfolding in redeeming sinners, they're all focused in one direction, and that is toward the great consummation, the great end in which God will be glorified. God is moving everything sovereignly to His own purposed, glorious end. And what is wonderful for us is that He has revealed so much about it in the Bible. There is so much that we can know about the end. The book of Revelation, as we mentioned this morning, tells us the most. That's why we wanted you to pick up a free copy of the book, because the time is near, so that you would have your own copy that would help you to understand the wonderful truths of the end laid out in the book of Revelation. And we're going to go through those elements of the end that are revealed in Scripture as the weeks go by. But Scripture is very clear about one thing. Foundational to any accurate understanding of the end is an accurate understanding of the future of Israel. This is the cornerstone of biblical eschatology. What I've been saying is pretty simple. If you get Israel right, you're going to get eschatology right. If you don't get Israel right, you will never get eschatology right. It is impossible to fully understand biblical teaching about the end times apart from understanding the future of Israel, the future of ethnic Jews in God's plan. And if you don't get Israel right, then your eschatology is confused, and you cannot be blessed, and you cannot give God appropriate glory, and you cannot have a full hope for what lies ahead, so that His glory is diminished, your joy and blessing are diminished as well. Getting Israel right means understanding what God has promised to do with Israel, for Israel, in the future. That all goes back to the Old Testament, where God made irrevocable, unconditional, unilateral promises and covenants to Israel to be fulfilled in the future. And within those covenants, He promised that the nation would one day be saved. A generation of ethnic Jews would be saved, that they would inherit their originally promised land, which God pledged to Abraham, that they would become a blessing to the whole world, that they would enjoy a kingdom over which God's anointed king, the Messiah, would rule from Jerusalem with justice and righteousness and peace for 1,000 years, that He would rule the whole world from Jerusalem, Israel being given a special place of blessing. This must come to pass because God has chosen Israel for this purpose in the end. It is then a matter of election. Israel is God's elect. The Bible calls Christ my elect. The Bible calls the church God's elect, and the Bible calls Israel my elect. And thus it is strange, very strange, that it is the very historic theology of sovereign election whose advocates have denied this to Israel. In the theological world, where people believe in the doctrine of election more strongly than anywhere else, they are more prone to deny Israel's election than anywhere else. In fact, they have come up with the idea that the church, God's new and present elect, receives all the promises once given to Israel, all those promises and covenants having been canceled to Israel because of Israel's apostasy, Israel's unbelief, and Israel's rejection of Christ. They then being permanently set aside, all the promises come to the church. Where did this come from? And I want to answer that a little bit tonight because you are very careful in how you consider the things that I teach you, and I know the question will come up because it's already come up. How could they ever arrive at such an idea? Where did it come from? There is no verse in the Bible anywhere that says the promises of God to Israel have been canceled and the church is the new Israel. You can't find that in the Bible. The question is then, where did it come from? Well, it started historically with a man named Augustine in the 5th century. And because he is such a formidable and shaping theologian who really was the main influence in the lives of people like John Calvin and Martin Luther and John Owen and many other formidable students of Scripture, it has the power of these great names behind it. The idea then, which really began in a formal sense with Augustine, flowed down through these great reformers and found honor among those who rightly honor the reformers, and so it has long survived. However, Reformed theology as such is hard-pressed to prove the point. And in fact, Reformed exegesis, that is the discipline of interpreting the Scripture, works very hard, I think, to manipulate the Scripture to avoid the obvious. They have come up with a view called amillennialism, which says there is no kingdom for Israel, and for that matter, there is no earthly kingdom, period. It denies, then, certainly a future earthly kingdom for a generation of ethnic Jews in which Christ reigns on earth and fulfills all the old covenant promises. Rather, it is called replacement theology. The church replaces Israel, and the blessings are spiritual. The kingdom then becomes only a spiritual kingdom and a heavenly kingdom, and not an earthly one at all. In order to make this work, as I said, they have to work really hard at moving their theological points around, and they have to do some very manipulative exegesis to avoid what is clearly in the Bible. Scripture has to be then removed from its normal sense and placed in a category of interpretation so that it doesn't mean what it appears to mean. As basic as Israel doesn't mean Israel. So to say it simply, to hold the view of amillennialists called replacement theology that the church replaces Israel in the promises of God, Israel as God's elect is no longer God's elect, canceled out, to come up with this idea that there therefore is no real earthly kingdom to fulfill those promises, and that they are fulfilled in the spiritual life of the church both now and in heaven, you have to deny the nature of divine sovereign election. You have to basically say that when God called Israel His elect, and when God gave them unconditional, unilateral, irrevocable promises, He didn't keep them. Or He doesn't keep them. So that Election doesn't